as our wake-up bells there. As we always...
Actually, they're probably ringing outside, right?
What time is it? 5 o'clock?
5:08.
5:08, no. They actually usually go like a minute or two, or a minute early, I would say. That is our wake-up call here, and we're ready to talk about the Grand Inquisitor. This is a grand chapter, so we actually have a guest podcaster here, the famed Farmer John. Actually, we talked about you.
The famed Farmer John, really?
I'm
honored.
Some of these people might know you, but know of you. They might know you too. You never know.
No, it is Atchison, right?
Yeah. That's true. That's true. Oh, any of them are graduates of Mahoma Academy in your classes?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Maybe not.
I don't remember who signed up for this podcast completely.
Yeah.
And better question, who's actually still with us?
Yeah.
Because we've lost a lot of people on the way. But
the heart is willing.
But the flesh is weak.
But the book's like 900 pages.
John Newman, who lives right next door to Dr. Jager, who both of them live across the street from me. John has come. He's been reading with us, and we're going to talk Grand Inquisitor today because it's probably the most famous chapter of the book, I would say. Right?
Yeah, I bet so.
And I actually saw there when I taught high school back in Virginia at the Nashville Dominican school there. They had a very sparse library, but one of the things they had in the library was a comic book edition of the Grand Inquisitor.
A comic book?
Comic book. But the drawings were very well done. And I remember I refused to read it because I was like, I'm not just going to read that. I don't remember what that chapter is about. I'm not going to read, a comic book version of one chapter of the Brothers Karamazov. But actually, I thought about it as I was reading this time, and I thought, I want to get a hold of that now after I've, actually worked through this much of the brothers, and I've read this in its proper context. I want to see what the comic book looks like, because I remember the pictures being pretty well done.
Yeah.
So
along similar lines, I'll make this and we can start actually talking about the Grand Inquisitor. So I have to load these. They're not really videos, but I have to make them a video to put on YouTube for people to listen to right now. There's the. You also might be interested in these videos.
Yeah.
And there's the, what are they called? The Thug Notes summary of the Brothers Karamazov. And I believe there's one just on the Grand Inquisitor.
Have you watched this?
No. But I'm very tempted.
Can you pause this podcast? Is that possible?
Actually, maybe we should just end and refer you to the Thug Notes for this chapter.
Yeah. But he goes through all the guy that runs this goes through all like the classics. He must be. There's probably 2 million times more listeners to his summaries than ours. But
I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure.
So that if you're looking for additional resources,
I doubt he starts it with Russian chant. It's probably more like some classic Dr. Dre or something. Snoop.
Anyway. Okay.
Does that make us cool to talk about that, or is that like not?
No, I don't know. That's
it's like retro now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, but so the Grand Inquisitor is kind of in the middle of the conversation that Alyosha and Ivan are having, and it seems so. You have the question of why would you have this order? Why would you believe in one who has ordained the world to go this way? And at the end, Alyosha says, you've forgotten him. On him is built the edifice. And that's because he's innocent and has sort of taken on all of the suffering of the whole world. And then the Grand Inquisitor is the address to that point that Alyosha made. It's sort of a reply in some sense. You can think of it as a reply.
I think it's ultimately Ivan's reply. His atheistic. I don't know if he even calls himself atheistic. Really not, right? Just maybe a rebel, right?
It's strange to characterize. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's call him a rebel. It's his rebellious reply to Jesus Christ as the answer to his catalog of children's suffering, right?
I have a bit of a question. How earnestly do we read the Grand Inquisitor as his response? Because even at the end of the Rebellion chapter, when he says, "Oh, I was waiting for you to bring him up. Oh yeah, I've got a response for him. You're sinless one." It reminds me of too many conversations I think I had in university with atheists or agnostic friends of mine who were just trying to like entrap you. Oh, I've got the response here.
Yeah.
So that's why I even started reading this chapter with a grain of salt, thinking, okay, this is Ivan's response, but I don't know how much even he really believes this.
Yeah.
Or if it's very clever.
It kind of goes back to where I think we were talking about this last podcast, where Ivan and Zosima are talking about his chapter on church and state. They're his article on church and state, and Zosima basically says the same thing. He says, "You don't even believe this. You just do this to distract your heart."
Right? I think that's right. So just as it seems like what's being proposed here is a view of Christianity through the Grand Inquisitor that is about an idea. So it's like sort of making Christianity an idea, and so in some ways Christ isn't really that central to Christianity. All you really need is the idea of Christ, not Christ himself. And I think there's somewhere towards the end of this chapter that made me think that that's exactly what Ivan himself is thinking, kind of about his own view of things. So he's sort of toying with the idea: is this what I'm proposing here? That Christianity is just an idea that people have? Is that just my idea? Is that like sort of my ideology of things? And I think
like my false understanding of Christianity or something.
Well, yeah, kind of. I mean, you might think another way to put it would be: is rebellion or atheism, is that itself also an ideology that I have, that sort of is becoming the modern way to have this idea of Christianity. Now it's certainly unique and novel for the time, at least more so, more novel then than it is now. But I think he is sort of toying with this idea, and he's throughout the next. This is right before we started this. I think the next two chapters are significant because you kind of get into the mind of Ivan and you realize that he's kind of struggling with this idea that he proposes in the Grand Inquisitor, because at the end he says, I'm not really sure that it would be possible to really love without God, and yet I think I can still love the sticky leaves and what have you, because I remember you, Alyosha. You're the one that sort of gives me this. So I think he's toying with this idea of a type of atheism or a rebellion or whatever we're going to call it, or a rejection of Christianity, and at the same time knowing that that way of life seems to be not practical. So just as his rejection of Christianity is a practical atheism, his sort of commitment to Christianity is also quasi-practical as well, because he sort of has this commitment to Alyosha. So I think he's torn. I don't know how the best way to put it, but he seems torn between do I really believe this or not? And you get that throughout all of his academic stuff. He seems torn whether this is really what I believe. Does this really express my thoughts or not? I don't know. So that's the sort of, if you want to call it, the upshot of this chapter was Ivan's left with unease about the whole situation.
Well, I think it's
which I think goes along with what you were saying. So he starts it kind of not really like, oh, I don't really believe this, but I'll say it anyway. But more like, I believe this, but in a mysterious, as we referred to the last time, in this mysterious way, it's unclear whether or not I actually really believe it. And he may never even specify to himself that I don't believe this, but he kind of more feels that he doesn't believe it than he ever like explicitly brings it up.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to that at the end of chapter 3, which is the brothers made friends, where he says, perhaps I want to be healed by you, and then smiles suddenly, right? And so I think that there's something about him saying everything that he's saying before Alyosha, who he really maybe loves, right? I think I want to say loves, and maybe doesn't know what that means, because he wants Alyosha to sort of fix his unease, or not fix it, but maybe like have a response to why am I living in this, as Alyosha calls it this hell in your heart and in your head. I think he recognizes that's what he's living, and he wants Alyosha to, I mean, this is one possible interpretation, that he wants Alyosha to give him the response that makes him stop worrying about the idea of the Grand Inquisitor and the problem of freedom and the weak slaves of humanity.
Yeah, so I don't know if you have the same book as 291. It's like right at the end of the chapter, but after he ends the poem, I guess, Alyosha says, let's see, this is right in the middle. The old man longed for him to say something, however bitter and terrible, but he suddenly approached the old man in silence and softly kissed him on his bloodless, aged lips. That was all his answer. And then after that, Alyosha seems sort of perturbed by this. And Ivan says, the kiss glows in his heart, but the old man adheres to his idea. And you with him, you too, cried Alyosha mournfully. And then Ivan's like, look, don't get so uptight about this whole thing. This is just a silly poem. I'm just floating an idea out. Don't think this is like, to lose your life over. And then
and yet he says he's going to kill himself.
Yeah, right. And then at the bottom, Alyosha's response after Ivan tries to calm Alyosha down. But the little sticky leaves and the precious tombs and the blue sky and the woman you love, how will you live? How will you love them? And then that's the line with the hell in your heart. But it looks like just as the old man, the Grand Inquisitor, had this idea, Ivan himself has this idea that he's adhering to. And it looks like what Alyosha is saying is you can't live with that. That's only going to lead to death. That's going to be a unbearable type of life. And Ivan thinks, no, it's not. You can bear it with the strength of the Karamazov.
Right. Karamazov basis.
Which is basically with the strength of sin, you can live to it. You just have to be an ardent enough sinner, and you can endure without love.
Which is Fyodor, right? I mean, he almost is, as much as he hates his father, he almost is saying that that's the only way to live authentically, is to live this life of total debauchery and baseness, because maybe it's true to yourself, given this whole schema of what life is about, right? That the Grand Inquisitor sort of proposes. But I don't know. But of course, Alyosha is kind of the answer. But we should get into what the Grand Inquisitor says, because just as I thought the rebellion chapter was like, gosh, I've had thoughts like this before. I got to think about this. So this one is very interesting, and to me it seems to hinge on an anthropology that assumes the weakness of man, right? And the inability of man to be able to take the dread gift, or however he puts it, of freedom. And I think, especially where he talks about, I mean, I'm really sort of disturbed by all of this, because it's hard to argue with this stuff. How he says, I'm trying to find the section where he talks about, so Christ comes and he has his elect and the few, the thousands but he doesn't love all the weak ones who can't take up the cross, basically. And that the Grand Inquisitor says, but I am the one who's going to love all of those whom you won't love.
Yeah, the weak.
Right? And so it's not that he's rejecting Christianity. The Grand Inquisitor is not rejecting Christ because he thinks everything is rot. Although he kind of does, because he says in the end, like, they'll die and that's it, right? So there's no immortality, right? This is one of the big themes of the book. But he seems to still want to do this for the sake of what he's calling love of the weak ones who can't endure the cross, the terrible freedom that Christ is sort of dies for to give to people, right? So page 286 right here, where he's sort of talking about riding the beast and raising the cup with mystery written on it, right? Obviously, the language is from Book of Revelation, right? The whore of Babylon. Sort of in the middle of that page, he says, a little bit before that. For who can rule men if not he who holds their conscience and their bread in his hands, right? The first two temptations. We have taken the sword of Caesar, and in taking it, of course, we have rejected thee and followed him. So he gets into this idea that he's sort of like Satan is the one who really loves, because he loves the weak ones. Moving a little bit further. And we shall sit upon the beast, raise the cup, and on it will be written mystery. But then, and only then, the reign of peace and happiness will come for men. Thou art proud of thine elect, but thou hast only the elect, while we give rest to all. Right? And so it's this idea that freedom is not a gift, because most people are slaves. And most people don't want freedom because it's going to lead them to kill each other. The only way to make people happy is to take away their freedom, and then they become free in their obedience to the ones who take their freedom upon themselves, right? Which Ivan takes as being sort of the... it's funny, 3 Catholics here talking, as being the hierarchy of the Catholic Church, right? Who's taking the freedom on themselves. But there is this, the way he kind of talks about what happens when you give everybody freedom, and he has this low view of man, which is very strongly based in original sin. I mean, I think about myself and my own low view of myself. The next page in the middle of it, he has this great line talking about complete submission and how that's the only thing that's going to bring them happiness. Then we shall give them the quiet, humble happiness of weak creatures, such as they are by nature. And so there's this idea that only the super strong can really take on freedom and live it. There's got to be a lot of Nietzsche behind it. I mean, not behind this, because Nietzsche... It was after, right? Yeah. But I mean,
there's a lot of Dostoyevsky behind Nietzsche.
Yeah, exactly. Or at least Dostoyevsky anticipated what Nietzsche was going to do, which I think is the entire de Lubac section in the Drama of Atheist Humanism on Dostoyevsky as prophet. But I don't know what you guys think of this. Like, isn't it true that we are indeed weak, and that the vast majority of people are in a sense sheep? Who, and I'm not necessarily not including myself in this, who are incapable of living their lives in a way that they control themselves, let alone live authentically in the world. And it's so, in a sense, it seems like it is a gift to remove the burden, as he puts it, right? The burden of freedom from them, take it on their own backs for the sake of their own happiness, which is ultimately not real happiness, right? Because he says on the next page after that, beyond the grave they will find nothing but death, but we shall keep the secret, and for their happiness we shall allure them with the reward of heaven and eternity, right? Just so that they can be happy now. There seems to be, maybe I'm Ivan here, there seems to be something true in this explanation of man, and something I don't want to use the word altruistic, but there's something loving in the way that the Grand Inquisitor is sort of explaining what he's doing for these people. Now, I don't think it has to be based in a rejection of immortality. I think it could be based in some sort of an understanding that, just this low anthropology, that man is incapable of this great gift. I don't know. I'm pontificating here.
Well, it seems like you're either rejecting the idea of, say, Christ's divinity, which the Grand Inquisitor doesn't seem to do at all. There's Christ in front of him, and he still addresses him as the Son of God, albeit the less wise of the two in the temptation. But
it's rebellion. It's not atheism.
Exactly, right? Because in nowhere does Ivan say, I don't believe in God. I don't believe in who Christ is. But but he doesn't accept his world. He rejects his world. So you're so committed to an idea that you have, but it's an idea that seems to be rooted in compassion. And I think that's partly where he seems like, as a Russian atheist, he's very, very emotional. This is not, you can see that he's flirting with Western ideas, but he's not totally given over to just pure cold reason. He's really feeling his way through all of this. So it does seem like he is the more compassionate one, but this is assuming that we're judging the success in people's lives and their happiness based on their deeds, their acts, the outcomes, and that. Well, just like Ivan has a personal encounter with Christ through Alyosha, but chooses to hold on to as ideas. It's sort of daring him, maybe you can heal me.
Yeah.
So the Grand Inquisitor has a personal encounter with Christ and just talk, which I think we can all identify with in prayer. So I don't know. I'm highly skeptical that. How do you measure success? If success is you give everybody freedom and they choose to do the right thing and there's the right outcome, but there's no real encounter with God.
I mean, maybe I'm looking for. Maybe I'm doing what Ivan's doing, and I'm expecting an answer that's not a kiss.
What you want? Ivan's looking for a logical response to a theological problem. He's saying, "What's 2 + 2? Blue." It seems that's what I got through all of Rebellion and this was. It seems very clever, and I think the fact that Ivan is still steeped in the tradition of the faith enough to make this critique from within, it seems, right? Where I think a lot of modern atheism just makes the critique entirely from without. Because it doesn't even enter in. He's entering in and seems to be, knocking down the walls from the inside, which is all the more devastating.
So when I was reading this, I was thinking, so what is freedom? What is freedom for? That Christ, suffered these 3 temptations to merit freedom for us, and what's the point of that? And I want to say that it was for the sake of bringing to fruition the sole mission of Christ, which was to die on the cross, and so that means that freedom is for the sake of being able to love. It's being able to be compassionate, and it looks like what the Grand Inquisitor is suggesting is no, you can be compassionate without freedom. You actually don't need freedom in order to truly suffer for another or to love another or what have you. And so I think it's kind of proposing, is it possible to love without Christ? And it looks like the Grand Inquisitor is saying, sure it is. And in fact, Christ kind of gets in the way of actually people being able to love. Where it looks like Alyosha I mean, at the end of the chapter, is saying, no, like, it's not possible to love without Christ. This is, how will you love them that seek leaves and the women, and so I think...
Woman, not women.
Well, I mean
I don't want to get to the Karamazov.
I was making the whole thing generic. Really particular to the journey. It's an induction. Okay. It's a good catch. I'm inclined to think that this is a proposal of the modern idea, which is, can you set up the Tower of Babel, set up the church, set up everything that's near and dear to thousands of years, and yet have the death of God, have Christ sort of fall out of the picture. Mm-hmm. And it seems that's what socialism, the communist ideal that's sort of
right
in the waters,
right,
is apparently doing, and that came a lot earlier on in the book, and I think it's still coming, and
mm-hmm.
it's very central to Demons and a lot of his other works. So I'm inclined to think that the idea of having freedom and say, like, what good is freedom? It seems that it's not possible to have any type of love at all without freedom,
mm-hmm.
and therefore you can't have freedom without this type of Christ undergoing the temptations and what have you. So it looks like Christianity is the only way to be free, it seems.
And therefore the only way to love.
And the only way to love.
And therefore the only way to really be happy.
But who needs love when you can have a cheaper happiness, when you can have a bit of compassion. Exactly, yeah.
And so I think that's what's being proposed here. And I think Ivan sort of identifying, here's this alternative that the vast majority of people aren't going to be able to know the difference between, because here behind closed doors, the Grand Inquisitor can sort of spot the difference. I'm proposing mm-hmm. the simulacra, and you're proposing genuine love, but no one's really going to want genuine love. And in fact, the common people aren't going to really be able to have the strength to actually sacrifice their lives and actually do mm-hmm. all that mm-hmm. painful stuff. So I'm going to provide them with the broad brushstrokes of what love looks like.
Bread and circuses.
Yeah. And the commoners, they're not going to know. But I think Alyosha is saying, no, the commoners will know, because mm-hmm. the commoners suffer, the commoners love, or at least they want to. So I don't know. I'm seeing you have these two characters, the Grand Inquisitor and Christ, proposing what. One way to think of it maybe is one is sort of an ideology of love. The other is actual, like, flesh and blood love, which is not pleasant. You can put it that way. It doesn't feel good, but and so I think that's what's being proposed. And why would you choose one over the other? Mm-hmm. I don't think we necessarily get an answer here, but I think the book, and especially the next book, when you move to Zosima, mm-hmm. I think you get this glimpse as to why one would find it find it better to choose one over the other.
Mm-hmm. But the ending, I think, is actually really important of this chapter, just because I think it does kind of give an answer where, going back to your idea, Jager, about the idea versus Christianity is an idea versus being an incarnational reality, or, like you were saying, John, an encounter. It seems like Alyosha plagiarizing at the end, right? Which I love that. That's plagiarism when he kisses him, right? Yeah. But yet he recognizes that that's, and Ivan does too, right? That's the true Christian response. Right? It's not an apologetic against like why what you're doing is wrong, which is kind of what I was asking for in my big long tirade just a second ago. But it's instead it's this just active love. I mean, that's the words of Zosima, right? Active love. That's what he says.
Yeah, that's how you know immortality.
Yeah, that's how you know freedom and happiness and love and all that, right? And so Alyosha, who is truly, I've seen this already a number of times. He's truly a son of Zosima, right? He lives and thinks and acts like Zosima has sort of like already shown us what Christianity is supposed to be, how he explains it and talks about active love to Madame Holikov, and it seems like Alyosha is sort of like really Zosima's child, like the incarnation of Zosima's philosophy. And so him standing up and kissing Ivan, I think, is his ultimate response. I mean, he doesn't do it quite at the beginning, right? He starts sort of arguing, but then he sort of ends it by doing that. And I think that the it was an effective argument. That's not an argument, right? Because what does Ivan say at the end? I mean, I think this. Let me just read this paragraph because I think it really shows that the Zosima way is what true Christianity is, and it almost seems like Ivan, I mean, not quite understands it completely, but maybe mysteriously starts to begin to understand it, even though he's still planning on dashing the cup at 30, right? So
can you start? I mean, can you just read I think
up here
where it begins with in the Karamazov way again.
Oh yeah.
I mean that's pretty far up, but
right here in the Karamazov
way.
But
I think this all right.
Here we go. I'm going to read a page.
Oh man,
I'm going to read a page.
Well, I mean, we only have one chapter talking about.
Yeah.
30 minutes.
So here we go. In the Karamazov way again, right? That's how he's going to escape the evil, right? Everything is lawful, you mean? Everything is lawful. Is that it? Ivan scowled and all at once turned strangely pale. Ah, you've caught up yesterday's phrase which so offended Musov, and which Dmitri pounced upon so naively and paraphrased. He smiled queerly. Yes, if you like, everything is lawful, since the word has been said. I won't deny it, and Mitya's version isn't bad. Alyosha looked at him in silence. I thought that going away from here, I have you at least, Ivan said suddenly with unexpected feeling. But now I see there's no place for me even in your heart, my dear hermit. The formula, all is lawful, I won't renounce. Will you renounce me for that, yes? Alyosha got up and went to him and softly kissed him on the lips. That's plagiarism, cried Ivan, highly delighted. You stole that from my poem. Thank you, though. That's interesting. Thank you, though. Get up, Alyosha. It's time we were going, both of us. They went out, but stopped when they reached the entrance of the restaurant. Listen, Alyosha, Ivan began in a resolute voice. If I am really able to care for the sticky little leaves, I shall only love them remembering you. It's enough for me that you are somewhere here, and I shan't lose my desire for life yet. Is that enough for you? Take it as a declaration of love, if you like. And now you go to the right, and I go to the left. And it's enough, do you hear? Enough. I mean, even if I don't go away tomorrow, I think I certainly shall go. And we meet again. Don't say a word more on these subjects. I beg that particularly. And about Dmitri, too. I ask you specially never to speak to me again, he added with a sudden irritation. It's all exhausted. It has all been said over and over again, hasn't it? And I'll make you one promise in return for it. When at 30 I want to dash the cup to the ground, wherever I may be, I'll come to have one more talk with you, even though it were from America. You may be sure of that. I'll come on purpose. It will be very interesting to have a look at you, to see what you'll be by at that time. It's a rather solemn promise, you see. And we really may be parting for 7 years or 10. And then he sends him off to Zosima, but he does ask him to kiss him once more.
Yeah.
Right? So I think, and maybe you have stuff to say about what's before this, but I think the last words of Ivan here are really important because he says, yes, I can love the sticky leaves, but only remembering you, and that somehow it's Alyosha that is the answer to the entire diatribe in the last two chapters, Rebellion and the Grand Inquisitor. And that he even says it's a declaration of love to Alyosha, right? He's saying, I love because of you, because of who you are. And then he makes this I think, even more revealing solemn promise that when I'm at 30 and I'm about to basically end it all, I promise I'll find you wherever you are and we will talk one more time. Basically, like about real things, like he says all Russians do.
Always stupidly.
Stupidly is better, though.
Real
Right?
things that in a stupid fashion.
Yeah. So he has this idea that when he decides he's going to kill himself, he's going to talk to Alyosha once more. I think with some sort of an idea that you could pull me out of this, right? Because it seems like he has pulled him to the point where he can love the sticky leaves and really love Alyosha. You love a person, right?
So, I mean, you've been waiting for me to say this, I'm sure, but this reminds me of Plato. Very, but so where you have.
So wait. The Plato podcast turned into the Dostoyevsky podcast. Now the Dostoyevsky podcast is turning into the Plato podcast.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that's right. That's a good point. But so towards the bottom of 292, where you just read, if I am really able to care for the sticky little leaves, I shall only love them, remembering you. And this is a huge theme throughout Plato's works, the idea of the remembrance of the forms. You don't really come to know the forms. You sort of always know them, and that the things you see and that you start to make sense of remind you of a higher truth that you kind of have always known, just sort of lost sight of. And so the stuff before you is like a mirror of a higher, truer, realer world. And I think what you have here is this is apparently an admission of theism here. I think the fact that Ivan is able to love the world because of Alyosha is to say he's able to love the world because of Alyosha's love of the world, which is because of Christ's love of the world, right? And so or actually Zosima's love of the world, which is so. I think what you sort of have, and now Ivan, of course, isn't saying this, but I think there's apparently nothing that says you have to be able to perfectly articulate what's behind this love in order for you to accept it or live by it. And I think what you kind of get is at least the openness to living in this way by Ivan, and that's has nothing to do with the ideas of Christianity. It just has to do with this one person that's before him, and it's the way of Alyosha, which seems to be the way that he is open to, and it seems that this has been shown him, and everything can be made sense of through a remembrance of him, Alyosha. And Alyosha is going to say, yeah, but I'm just doing this because Zosima. It was made sense to me by Zosima, and Zosima, as we'll see, is doing it because it made sense to him by his brother. And so I think what you have is this life of love being passed down, and so the world is making
by
sense.
encounter.
Yeah, and so it's always within this mystery about, I'm not exactly sure what's really behind this, but what's right in front of me is what makes sense of it. It sort of opens me up to this much more mysterious way of living. I don't know. So it seemed that it was a an admission in some sense of love, which is ultimately an admission of Christ. I mean, if God is love, then it turns out.
I think this paragraph that he said, where he almost challenges Alyosha to give him a final answer, right?
And he says, "Look, you're going to have to reject me because I don't accept what you accept. So you have to reject me." And the only thing he does is what Christ did to the Grand Inquisitor, right?
Right. But it's interesting the way that he says it, right? I see there's no place for me even in your heart. But I don't think he thinks that. I think he's saying that to get a response from Alyosha, because if you even the way that he asks the question at the end, the formula, all is lawful, I won't renounce. Will you renounce me for that? Yes. I mean, even that, like, there's probably a grammatical term for this, John, you would know, right? Where you ask a question and you assume a certain response. You know what I'm talking about? Where you assume yes or you assume no, right?
Sure.
I know that there's like specific Latin constructions in that, and you know like 50 languages, so you might be able to recite this in Russian for us, actually. But how he assumes this, like, he says, will you renounce me for that yes? But I wonder what that yes means. Like, it's almost like, I hope you don't say yes, because if you don't say yes, then it's almost like he has hope that the diatribe of the last two chapters is actually false. And the fact that Alyosha does the kiss, it seems to be, like you said, an admission of love. And therefore, I think it seems to be a hope that he gives him.
I mean, so you get a lot of torment in Ivan here, right? So the reason I wanted you to read up there, one of the reasons was, I mean, after he says, look, the way to live is to embrace the Karamazov way. And he says, Alyosha says, you mean everything's lawful then? And then Ivan scowled, and all at once turned strangely pale. So it seems that this idea also sickens him. The idea that's completely behind his entire way of life brings him like discomfort. It's unsettling to him. And that's when he then transitions to say, but because this is what I accept, you have to reject me, or will you? And it's maybe realizing this is the consequences of my worldview. But it seems that these are consequences that he's not happy with. And so he's sort of hoping
there's something else. Yeah.
But I don't know. But I mean, you get what seems to be a complete turnover from the top of 292 to the bottom of 292 with, you've got to just hold on to baseness, and then at the bottom, after Alyosha kisses him, no, you can actually love things because of you.
Well, it seems like since he finishes the poem of the Grand Inquisitor, I read him as being very aloof, and he's sort of gleeful. And, okay, now the ball's in Alyosha's court where he's supposed to give a response, right? And he knows that he's trying to elicit that. And then he has these moments where he gets serious, or, he scowls, right? At the thought of everything is lawful. But I don't know. I don't read him quite as earnestly as we've been discussing him right here. I think that... I think he's being very playful, even when he says, "Okay, well, this is what I believe. I won't renounce the formula. So, like, you're gonna reject me," because then he just flits from that back to, "I will really be able to care for the sticky little leaves, loving them, only remembering you." What does it mean for Ivan to be loving the sticky little leaves? I think that to be using the term love to mean the active love that Alyosha has for everyone that he encounters, that he's learned from Zosima, that Zosima, got from his brother, and an encounter with Christ. And then to say that Ivan loves the world the way that he loves humanity in this broad sense, I don't know. It seems like a real cheapening of that idea of love. And I'm not positive that he says, I can love the world because you love the world. I think there's something more of, I think of you and I love you. He doesn't exactly say why. But I don't know that it's that you love the world, so I love the world. Maybe there's somewhere else in the text that actually says that. But to me, it's more, I love you, which these brothers are constantly saying to each other. And you think, what do you even mean? Honestly, they're always kissing each other on the lips and saying, I love you. And they're like, you do? What? I don't get it, to be honest. And then when he says, I'm going to come and find you before I'm 30 and I dash the cup to the ground, I don't know. To me, that sounds like the most annoying of annoying, sort of like, oh, it's all about me, and I'm going to come and find you. And he's got this grand idea. Like, he's still hoping that Alyosha's going to engage him somehow, because he's delighted by the gesture, right? When Alyosha kisses him, that's plagiarism, cried Ivan. highly delighted. He's not upset about that. He's just an homage to my poem.
You're playing the game too,
right? Yeah. So I to me, he's that sort of playful sense of somebody who knows they're arguing about something that's very serious, but isn't yet willing to cede any of the ground that they need to make progress on it. So I think it's his immaturity that comes through here, because we have to remember that Ivan is, I don't want to give anything away, with the Holocaust scene, with the profession of love and all that. Is that before this or after this?
To Katerina?
Where Alyosha basically outs him for having loved Katya. Is that earlier than this? I think. Yeah. I'm losing my...
Yeah.
And he takes their hands and puts them together.
Right.
And that's right. And he's like, what are you doing? You're such a fool, Alyosha. And that's
right.
That's right before.
But I mean, in that chapter, they're commenting on, Ivan looks his age, because he's what, 20?
So young.
8.
Yeah.
No, he's not even 28. Dimitri's 28.
No, he's like 24.
He's like 20. Yeah.
Yeah. So because Alyosha's like 20. 20?
I think he's 20.
Like 24,
22. Yeah. But he's quite young, and I think that, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
This was, and maybe I bring too much personal experience of, I didn't go to a Catholic university where I was the only Catholic in my whole university experience. I mean, in a lot of ways, right? So I would have these discussions with people, and there's nobody like the Irish who can feel like they have the right to like pronounce on everything that has to do with the church, and you can't argue with them because you're just a dumb American. You don't have so I don't know. Yeah, I'm a lot more skeptical of everything Ivan has to say. Not to undercut anything, but
I think that one. And I think this is on purpose. So we mentioned this at like the very first thing we said about the book was that this is the favorite novel of the greatest modern atheist as well as the greatest modern Christians, right? Which is a great accomplishment of Dostoyevsky, is that you can have the exact same plot be one which the most like ardent atheist sees as sort of the grist to the atheist charge or mill, and the that's exact same plot is sort of the motivation behind Christianity itself, it seems, but it all sort of is in how it's read, and I think that is partly what might be at stake in this whole thing. You see one and the same reality, but different people. You don't see one. You look at the same appearances, and one person sees one reality there, and the other sees a different reality there, and so that this came up a little bit in actually not even his paper that he discusses with Zosima in Zosima's cell. But I'm inclined to think that Ivan is. He's sort of in jest, but he's also greatly pained by these real questions, and yet he's sort of pained because he doesn't really think they can really be answered, and so he doesn't want to put too much weight into it. But yet at the same time, I do read him as legitimately being concerned with only one person, at least here, and that's Alyosha. Alyosha seems to be the only person that sort of has any place in his heart. Everyone else is just kind of there, and I don't want to say too much, but in the Zosima chapter, I think what's being proposed is that's enough for the entire world to be redeemed for Ivan, is to have one individual in that person's life which is capable of being loved by that individual. That then means that the whole world can then be seen and sort of restructured, so to speak, for that person in a completely different light. And it looks like Ivan, of course, isn't doing that here, but he's at least open open to that. I don't think that happens until, like, well, I don't want to say if it happens or not. Okay, sorry. But okay, all right. But it looks like I take this as Ivan actually does love Alyosha, but he doesn't really think there's too much involved in that, except on your idea there is the possibility of me loving things. Whether that's going to actually happen or not, who knows? But you'll be with me. I'll sort of always be thinking of you. Maybe that's why he's like, I'll come and see you. And I kind of joking, but I take it as he's legitimately concerned with Alyosha and his place in Ivan's life, which I don't know. Maybe that's giving Ivan too much seriousness. But given the conversation he has earlier with Zosima, I took him as earnest, and so I don't know. I'm inclined to think the vast majority of this might not be that earnest, except at the end here when he sees how serious Alyosha is about this. That kind of affects him. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I can totally see the way you're saying it too, John. But even if it's that way, I still think that there's a glimpse of serious hope, because there's continually glimpses of seriousness in Ivan.
Sure.
And hope that there's an answer to his question of rebellion, which goes back, like you were saying, Andy, to the Zosima section where everybody kind of is weirded out, not weirded out, but they're like surprised at his sort of like clinging to Zosima, talking about how he's doing all this and he doesn't really believe any of the stuff he's writing in the magazine articles. Then there's the weird smile that he gives and says, there's a weird smile at some point, I don't remember, but I remember Alyosha noting it and thinking, I've never seen him look that way before. And then there's the comment that he makes at the beginning where he says, maybe you can save me from this, and he gives another weird smile. And so I think even though he might be youthful, he might be sort of tongue in cheek with everything he's saying. I think he's using that to hide something that's authentic underneath it all, and that something authentic did happen with Alyosha kissing him that makes him think maybe there is an answer to this, even if he continues to sort of protect his heart by, sly smiling and joking and
right.
So I think it could be that way. But I think either way, there's going to be some glimpse of hope, I think, that's happening in Ivan. At least that's the way I'm taking it here.
Mm-hmm. I think the next two chapters, I think you get a little insight into the inner life of Ivan, which leads you to see that he's actually beating himself up inside, and I think it's this slow beating himself up inside that leads to, well, whatever happens in the book titled Ivan. Yeah, 11. And so I think you only get, I know jumping ahead, but you only get to these events by like the slow, like, I'm being in jest, but at the same time realizing there's something that I'm hiding by being in jest.
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think he's kind of has this. I know I'm not being sincere with myself, but I also can't be serious about this. And it's Alyosha's seriousness that sort of makes that all the worse for him. We've all been in situations like that.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever had the maturity of Alyosha just to.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna treat you with active love here, man.
Yeah, you're trying to talk about like this thing that's happened, you know, that you read in the Gospels and it's really moving, and then the person you're talking to is like making jokes about no one expects the Spanish Inquisition. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I think that there's a complexity inside Ivan that I don't think rules out either of these readings, and I kind of I tend to interpret him way in one way, and it's probably to the fault of taking him too serious. But that would also then undermine what's to come. I don't want to reveal too much, but I think it helps to interpret what's here by some insight of what's going on.
Okay.
There's turmoil in his life, put it that way. And I don't think that would make any sense without there being the seeds of turmoil early on. So I don't know.
I'm also glad that Alyosha explained that not all of Rome is like this.
Yeah.
Just the worst parts. Just the Jesuits.
Just the Jesuits.
Well,
no, but it is interesting. I actually found that comment interesting. Where this is page 289. He says the whole poem's absurd. Your poem is in praise of Jesus, not in blame of him as you meant it to be. And who will believe you about freedom? Is that the way to understand it? That's not the idea in the Orthodox Church. That's Rome, and not even the whole of Rome. It's false. Those are the worst of the Catholics, the Inquisitors, the Jesuits. But there's a recognition that not, like, no matter what beef the Orthodox has with Rome, with the West, not all people in the West are like this, right? And I think, us in the West here should think the same way about the East. Like, no matter what beef we have about the East, not all people in the East are like the sort of caricature of the East that we have for them. That there's real, authentic Christianity being lived in this, and that's true in Protestantism and everything, right? And I think there's something that Alyosha sees about living love that's possible in Christianity. Even in sort of a messed up environment, which I guess is kind of the world, right? So I appreciated that he said that, and sorry for all those Jesuits out there.
Well, and then even later,
he
in that paragraph he says, we know the Jesuits, they're spoken ill of, but surely they're not what you describe. They're not that at all, not at all. They're simply the Romish army for the earthly sovereignty of the world. They're not about lofty melancholy. They're really just about material gain. So back off. But the question too, when he says, "Who will believe you about freedom?" I think if you were to just give somebody the comic book version of the Grand Inquisitor and say, "Read this and tell me what you think," I think most people would read it and say, "Oh yeah, that's an interesting." Scenario here back and forth between Christ and the Inquisitor, but it talks a lot about human freedom, because certainly in the West, I think that this notion, would people rather be free or would they rather be happy? I don't know. I think if you're honest and you read that, you say, yeah, most of us would be content,
right, to
be content, right, and not to be free.
Right.
Now that we'd take peace, even death, over this awful freedom.
Yeah.
And maybe to a reader in 1860, 1860, I think it's 61 is when Dostoyevsky dies. But even to a reader in the 19th century, does this come across as obviously some sort of a Western idea, some sort of messed up interpretation of freedom? What's the authentically Orthodox way to view freedom? And I was looking forward to talking to you guys about it, because I thought, well, we would talk about freedom not just as the ability to choose and do whatever it is that you want, but it has to do with your interwoven social connections and obligations to other people. Is there a different understanding of freedom in the East, or a different way of articulating that
I don't know, actually. I'm kind of I feel like I'm learning what the East maybe thinks of freedom in Dostoyevsky, and there's a question of, is Dostoyevsky a real sort of authentic interpretation of the East as in a general sense or not? I don't know. I think it's kind of interesting, and I also think that actually nowadays in the West, this question of what is freedom has come up way more. And that what Dostoevsky is hinting at is what a lot of Westerners are wondering about too, whether freedom is not this, if we want to say that the modern project, the liberal state and its own understanding of freedom, right, the liberal state, right, that it's failed, right. Is it because of a false understanding of freedom? And I think people like. Look at the Second Vatican Council's Declaration on Religious Freedom. Look at all sorts of questions of what does it mean to be free today, like the Schindlerian books. D.C. Schindler is all about this. Luigi Giussani, Community and Liberation, right? There's a huge question of what is freedom, I think, in the West. And I think it's asking something along the lines of what's happening here. So I don't know the East, but I think the West is definitely asking this question of what is freedom. And is it a good thing? And if it is, and if it is in a sense very central to Christianity, which the Grand Inquisitor seems to be, the whole chapter seems to be assuming, then it must mean something more than mere arbitrary, nihilistic, choosing between Coke or Pepsi. Right? It's something much more drastic than that. Right? But I don't know. Jagger, you got any Eastern perspective on this?
No, I don't think so. Yeah, I find the discussion of freedom in Dostoyevsky seems to be. It's hard to say whether it's an Eastern. Like Eastern versus Western thing, or if it's a modern versus pre-modern,
or even beyond modern.
Yeah. Thing. And so I there's a lot of ways there's a lot of variables in the conversation on freedom in modernity, because so much is sort of at so much is up in the air that it's hard to say, is this an Eastern view? Is this just a pre-modern view? Is this a post-modern view? Because especially in Dostoyevsky, you get strange sort of, at least a lot of people, unique theology, unique philosophy, but at the same time it's apparently has ties with like the tradition, and yet a lot of people don't think it's the tradition, and it's engaged. I don't know. So there seems to be a lot at stake. So I don't know if reading Dostoyevsky is the best. Like, here's a proposal of Russian
19th century Russian understanding of freedom.
Yeah. I don't know. Because at least in much of his books, he seems to be saying the Russian way, at least for a lot of Russians, has ceased to actually be Russian. That's partly what he seems really annoyed with, is that Russians have given up on the Russian way.
It's usually the Germans' fault too.
Yeah, Dr. Hetchenstuber.
I can make nothing of it.
I can make nothing of it. That's deliberate throughout the whole thing.
Well, but it's also true with, and this is, Dostoevsky again is a prophet, right? Because what happens in Russia is Marxism, which is German, right? And so the Soviet Union is, in a sense, the Marxist project, which is an import. Right? It comes from the outside. But well, That about does it. Besides the question of whether or not the Masons are trying to do the Catholic thing, but we won't get into that.
That was also. We'll save that for another day. But we'll end with some more of the good stuff.